I thought philosophy was political philosophy when I was getting interested in ideas, um, and reading Ayn Rand and or at least starting to. And so I was thinking when it came time for my PhD, I would work on Hobbes and Locke and the founding fathers and try to show that Locke is very different from Hobbes and things like that. And then I was reading Atlas Shrugged for the second time, and I mean I'd noticed the references to Aristotle before, but hadn't really done anything with the information. Okay, Aristotle, and then but this time it really caught me. Why is Aristotle the greatest of your philosophers? And why does he have a character reading this obscure, this stuff from Aristotle's Metaphysics in the
Yeah.
Valley? And I thought I want to look into this. Why Aristotle? I'm thinking, I don't think he's a champion of capitalism. And so I went to the very beginning of the complete works of Aristotle, and it was the categories, and it I couldn't see the value in it at all. But I became fascinated with that, and while doing that, I got really into not just Aristotle but ancient Greek culture. And I kind of made it a mission to find out what was valuable in Aristotle. I started taking courses in ancient Greek because I knew if I wanted to make this my specialty, I needed to read the text in the original. And so that's how I got into it. And by the time I was really serious about doing graduate work, I that was the field I wanted, and I wrote my dissertation on Aristotle's politics, his criticisms of Plato's Republic, and
Yeah.
that. So I was hooked.
So what made you make that switch? That is what took you from the irrelevance of categories and metaphysics to, no, I get it. This is amazing.
I wish I remembered it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. It was just something about the breadth and the depth of his thought, and trying to connect it to what Ayn Rand said was valuable about him, because it's very terse remarks, the
Mhm.
objective reality and sorry, the efficacy of the mind. And you don't really see that in those terms. I mean, she saw it in Aristotle, and she knew the history of his influence on Western culture. But I just became very interested in him generally, and then his critique of Plato, his criticisms of the forms of the communism of the Republic, and all of that. And then I kind of I had this same interest in political philosophy that really grew out of kind of my interest in reading dystopia novels and anti-communist, Soviets,
Huh.
criticism of the Soviet Union, and
Yeah.
that got me into politics, and so they kind of merged, and I started doing work on Aristotle's politics, and but I wish there wasn't this aha moment. It was kind of just trying to figure out why would Ayn Rand, recognize him. And then when I started to read the nonfiction, and she refers to him in for who, for the new intellectual, and he is the founder of, everything. And then she has that one line about everything our language, progress, industry, it all, the founding of America. She laid on his shoulder, or put on his shoulders, and that I found that's kind of bizarre. It can't be right, and yet, so I really dug into that, and yeah, that kept me going for a long time, not just through the PhD, but if you remember long ago when you organized conferences, you had that wonderful one in Italy, and
Right.
that's where I gave the lectures on. I gave a pair of lectures, Aristotle and the Renaissance, because what she said, that he
Huh.
made the Renaissance possible, was against everything that you hear in courses in medieval philosophy, and in into the modern era, and so
Did
I
did we
wanted to look
record?
into that.
Did
What's
we
that?
record those?
Yeah, I think they exist somewhere. Someone at the time said you should write this into a popular, you should write a
Yeah.
popular book. I said,
Yeah.
nah, no, I'm a scholar, and no one would buy it anyway. And then I think 2 years later, Aristotle's children came out and made millions. It's
That's
it's all
right.
about timing. Um,
So,
but
so I was going to ask, so, to what extent is it recognized in academia or among scholars that Aristotle plays this role in the West? I mean, we've got Aristotle's children, we've got the Cave in the Light, we've got
right.
draws. I mean, but to what extent is that view unique to Ayn Rand, or is it becoming more acceptable within kind of philosophy, the history of philosophy?
I think it's becoming more acceptable, but I think the way people interpret it is that the story is messier than, any one statement can make. So when I was in graduate school, the standard line was Aristotle was the philosopher of the Middle Ages and Plato was the philosopher of the Renaissance. And what they had in mind was that when Aristotle's works were rediscovered and reintroduced into the Latin West, I mean, they were immediately regarded as important, although they were also censored and put on lists, and the church was keeping an eye on that on it because they knew this was it wasn't kosher to mix religions. Um, but and so it's but it and by the time you get to Aquinas, for example, I'm actually by I think it was 1254, something like that, to teach philosophy in the universities in the Latin West was to teach Aristotle.
Hmm.
And I mean, so that's why they saw him as this medieval figure. And then in the Renaissance, you get people like Galileo and others sort of pushing back or objecting to rejecting this sort of ossified Aristotle, that, Aristotle's view of the universe, his view of the solar system, that was, part of his philosophy. And at the same time, Plato's works, which weren't much known in the Middle Ages, were rediscovered in the Renaissance, and people loved them. You get these, a lot of these figures, even some of the really good ones, who saw themselves as Platonists. Uh, so it gets very confusing. But what people are starting to spend more time, I think, working on is that story doesn't really fit. That Aristotle, yeah, there were these people who were pushing back against Aristotle, but even Galileo, for example, says, while he's objecting to these Catholic Aristotelians who won't look through microscope or through telescopes, he's also saying, I'm the real peripatetic. If you really understand Aristotle, because he wants to look at the world and use your reason to describe
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
And I think you see that, I mean, Aristotle's works were really influential at the University of Padua, and where you had Galileo and William Harvey and people like that. Jim Lennox is doing work, I think, on the Aristotelian influence, the unacknowledged influence of Aristotle on science and things of that sort. So this story that you have, Aristotle arrives in the Latin West, he's influential on Aquinas, he becomes this dogma in effect, which in a way is true. That's what
Mhm.
happens. And then you have these really good people who are, empirically minded in a good sense, if there is one, and well, you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
then, based on sensory observation and reasoning based on that, and a good scientific method. And there's definitely an Aristotelian influence there, but it just doesn't. It's not as clean, clear cut as you would see.
So that kind of understanding of the both the complexity of the story, but the underlying value of Aristotle, that is becoming more prevalent among historians and historians of philosophy.
It's not my field, so I haven't kept up. But you do get these popular books about,
Mhm.
about Aristotle and his influence, of the books you mentioned, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's more work of that kind. I mentioned Jim Lennox, but he has an Ayn Rand connection, and uh, not I mean, he could have done it independently of that, I think, but there must be work on that. I mean, he's done work on even Aristotle's influence on Darwin, and
Yeah.
there's these interesting connections that haven't been thoroughly explored, I think.
And of course, philosophy, I mean, like Aristotle's impact on he impacts the culture, and then the culture can impact an individual. It doesn't always go in a direct line.